It was a day that rocked Los Angeles County to the core. January 7th, first the Palisades Fire, destroying picturesque coastal communities. Then the Eaton Fire, wiping out close-knit foothill neighborhoods. Lives were forever changed as victims worked to pick up the pieces and find a way forward. And now, nearly 3 months later, we're giving you a look from above at what was lost, what was saved, and what's ahead. Good evening, I'm Desmond Shaw in SKYCAL, and hard to believe that it has now been 3 months since the devastating fires, the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire. And we thought that we would take this opportunity as we approach 3 months on to see not just what was lost, but what was saved. Talk a little bit about some of the history that is still here. Talk about some of the things that were lost and see how the rebuilding effort is going. We know that some of the first permits have been issued for the rebuilding in the Palisades Fire. So I'm joined tonight by my colleague Mike Rogers at the desk, and he will possibly be fielding some questions from the audience live on YouTube and our KCAL News app. And I know we're also live on KCAL News. So I'm going to flip the camera actually first over to my awesome pilot Dylan right here, and there he is. He's going to now take us to, we're going to start with the ignition site from the Palisades Fire. So here we are over the Palisades area, and I'm also going to put up the map tracker just for a moment to kind of show you where we are at as we head towards the ignition point where all of this started. You may know or may have realized when this was all happening that I was conspicuously absent from the fires. That was for a couple of reasons. For one, no one was really able to fly at first because of the winds. President Biden was also here at the time, but I just also happened to be on a boat in the Pacific. It was extremely awkward for me watching all of my colleagues working so hard on all of this. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for now, over to Mike Rogers, and good evening, Mike. So here we are at where we believe all of this started here, just to the east of the Palisades Highlands.
Hey, Des. Yeah, good evening, and good evening, everyone watching. Yeah, that's the spot where we saw federal investigators from the ATF really looking to see if they can determine exactly what caused it. The running theory, though not confirmed yet as the investigation continues, is that a smoldering firework from days before over the New Year's holiday that was already responded to and put out may have rekindled, sparking the Palisades Fire, which would forever change the landscape of the Pacific Palisades and really Los Angeles altogether. A second theory filed by a lawsuit, or revealed, I should say, by a lawsuit, claims that DWP power lines were responsible for a second ignition point hours and hours later, something that DWP claims is not accurate, saying that the power line that is in question was turned off before the time of the lawsuit says that the second ignition point started. Regardless, though, Desmond, of the ignition, you can see the damage still palpable. 3 months later, there is still so much recovery and repair to be done.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any easier to see all this. I mean, we've been looking at it for 3 months, and I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say it's still really stunning when we come and we look at all the damage. So here, this is the Palisades Highland here to the west as the flames began to fan out here to the west. And we're going to take it all the way to Malibu in a bit. But first, we want to head over to the east and show Pacific Palisades proper, which, as we know, was just completely devastated. Some of these neighborhoods that look like they were involved in World War II or something. It's really just a surreal thing to see. And as I widen out as well, you know, Mike and I were just talking about how another kind of surreal thing is, you know, it's springtime, we've had all these lovely rains, and we have kind of these green blossoms coming up on the hillsides, but at the same time, it's almost like it's covering the destruction, the burn scar. It's this mixture of kind of beautiful rebirth, but also all of the burned out neighborhoods. And it's just such a, yeah, like I said, a really surreal thing to see. So now as we're coming here, this is going to be north of Sunset near the Village. And, you know, we've had reporters on the ground. We've shown you clips and bits and pieces of everything. But I feel like we needed to kind of show everyone the full scope of everything that was destroyed over the course of that week in the Palisades and in the Altadena area. And now as we zoom in on these homes. So obviously the Pacific Palisades, a reputation for wealth, but we can't, I don't think it's fair to just say that everyone that was here was an extremely wealthy multimillionaire. There were a lot of homes here that were built in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, maybe people that had good studio jobs,
generational
grips or cameraman or something. Yeah, absolutely. And they were able to buy, you know, a little slice of heaven, really the American dream here in the Palisades. I mean, a lot of these homes had been remodeled. I mean, no doubt these people had a lot of equity. But look, as I, again, just put up the map tracker again, almost every single home in this neighborhood. So this is north of Sunset and north of the Palisades Village area. And it's breathtaking. I mean, it's almost like, where do you begin to even start to rebuild all of this? So many lots. I mean, you're starting to see some of them have been cleared, but a lot still have not. I want to credit, it was a great quote that I saw from Vintage LA, a really great account on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days, and she had said that all that's left on a lot of these properties are chimneys, and they're almost like tombstones. Yeah. The way that they just kind of are like a very eerie memorial. So this was one of the neighborhoods that saw the first devastation. And I mean, Mike, I know you were putting in some extremely long hours those days. I mean, we were talking about winds 80 to 100 miles an hour. I can't imagine what that must have been like to cover this as it was beginning to unfold.
Yeah, Desmond, it was really intense. And, you know, one of the things that obviously what we do with you is when there's a fire, we launch the chopper. And one of the most concerning things to me as an assignment editor and as a journalist when we covered this is that there were no aircraft in the sky immediately kind of following the start of the fire into the evening hours because those intense winds. And I don't know that I've ever worked a fire to this magnitude where there was zero air support. And you look at it from the ground, we obviously couldn't fly because of the winds, neither could the fire departments, and you take away that such integral tool of fighting fires here in California, and you really see what is left. And we have talked to a fire chief after expert who says it doesn't matter how many fire crews you had here, it doesn't matter how many fire engines you had, no one was going to be able to get in front of this fire. Nobody was going to be able to stop the spread that it had because of the ferocious winds that were flaming these, or fueling these flames rather, through the Palisades area for days. It really wasn't even until the next day. And Desmond, I want to point out while we're doing this, one of our YouTube viewers pointed this out. You know, there are still people in the Palisades that are restricted, that can't get to this neighborhood. This neighborhood is still technically closed to the general public. So even every now and again, and you look at one right there, there's a home that is still standing. But what's left of the neighborhood? You've got one or two homes that are up, but the whole block is just decimated after all of this. And that also begs the question is, are those people back in their homes tonight? Is there still power yet in that area? What exactly is the thought process of those people? Do they want to come back to a neighborhood that is absolutely gone?
Yeah, and you know, also the toxicity element. I mean, I remember in the weeks after, I mean, it just seemed like the winds would not stop. And after the fires were essentially extinguished, we had some gnarly winds, and you saw the toxic clouds that were being kicked up over the Palisades and over the Eaton Canyon area. And so I know that is still a really, really big concern. I mean, I love, if you know me, you know that I love getting out and exploring the city, the area with my dog and walking these neighborhoods, and I have walked them, and almost as like a sense of closure for myself. You know, I want to come to some of these neighborhoods and see it on the ground, but there is, you know, a really legitimate concern still of all of the toxicity as well. So we wanted to come over here to Will Rogers Park, and let's move the chopper, Dylan, just a little bit over to the kind of northeast, because this was one of the first historic tragedies, really, was Will Rogers State Park. I feel very fortunate to have come here. I never got to visit the ranch house, but here it was. This was Will Rogers' personal estate. He was a legendary figure during the golden age of Hollywood. He was actually the highest paid actor in Hollywood, believe it or not, during the golden age. He was also a widely syndicated columnist and humorist, and he was able to buy 186 acres of land. This guy was the real deal cowboy. This was a polo field right down here. He had the ranch house, he had stables, and so much of it was destroyed. This beautiful, beautiful ranch home right here that was also a museum. The only good news is that some of the park staff, this is a California state park, and they were able to get some of the artifacts out of the home when they were evacuating. And fortunately, they were also able to evacuate all of the horses that were on the property. So it's, you know, a small consolation, but the park continues to be closed. There's no reopening, and that's really going to be a theme for a lot of the things that we show you that got destroyed. I mean, we sure hope that this could reopen sometime this summer, and it's, again, kind of this eerie mix of it is looking so beautiful right now in the springtime but you also just have this, burnt out historic building. It was certainly a California historic landmark, I believe a national historic landmark. This is also the eastern end of the Backbone Trail, which is one of the most beautiful hiking trails in the country. So we won't have access to any of that for a very long time. But Mike, do you remember were there even, because this was, I think, when all the choppers were grounded,
right.
was there any live video of the ranch house burning? In real time?
I don't believe that I saw, Desmond. I think at that point, this is so far back up into where the fire was anyway, that our crews were obviously concerned about safety as well. So we didn't get all the way back up in here at the time of the actual fire burning, but it's just one of those other landmarks that kind of went down with everything. And as you mentioned, that mix of dead trees but green grass down there is always kind of, a little bit eerie to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we make our way west, we're going to go south of the village, and we're going to show you a couple of other really amazing landmarks here. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other side of that, we're going to highlight a couple of the things that were saved here along Pacific Coast Highway near Sunset here in the Palisades. We'll be right back. Here we are over the Palisades, where Sunset, near where its western terminus at PCH, and we wanted to show you this really cool thing that you can also find a full segment of. Look at this on the Lake Shrine, which belongs to the Self-Realization Fellowship, a Buddhist organization, which is completely intact. Down here, I believe that this was a school, possibly the Waldorf School, which was destroyed. I know we've talked a lot about that. Extremely sad, and it's going to be obviously a mixture of loss and survival. But the Lake Shrine, may have survived because everything here is so lush, and this is actually the only natural fed spring in all of Los Angeles, although it happened by accident. It's a really fascinating story. You can look up the segment on our SKYCAL Look at This playlist to learn more about the Self-Realization Fellowship. But there is a World Peace Memorial to Mahatma Gandhi here. There's also statues to honor other religions. There's a statue of Jesus Christ as well. So I know this is a very, a very important place for reflection and healing of the soul for some people. And it's also free to come to the Self-Realization Temple. I'm not entirely sure if it has reopened yet, but that is one thing that you can check out there in the Pacific Palisades. A really, really amazing story if you want to go look up. Another thing that was, so they were actually both sites at one point were developed by one of the same legendary figures in Los Angeles, Alfonso Bell. As we make our way over to the Bel Air Bay Club, there was a lot of concern about this as well being destroyed. There was definitely some damage around the property, but the upper clubhouse here, which is definitely the most remarkable building, a very popular wedding venue, this managed to survive. So Alfonso Bell, I should say, who developed Bel Air, the Bel Air Country Club, parts of Westwood and Beverly Hills, he developed this as well. And he had attempted to develop the Lake Shrine property and was actually the one who accidentally uncovered the springs. So I have not done a segment on the Bel Air Bay Club yet, but we'll definitely do that in the near future. As we look over here, so this was, I believe, the Palisades Bowl mobile home park, and this must have been the nicest mobile home park on the planet, and I don't think a single one of them survived. One at the top, Dylan showed me, just one little one. I mean, and you have to imagine, wow, whatever kind of smoke damage they may have, and you just wonder if people are going to be able to get insurance coverage now at this point, and if they'll even be able to rebuild. I know I'm kind of reminded of the Sayre fire in a big mobile home park in Silmar that was decimated, but they were able to rebuild, and I'm sure those folks who probably, pay, I can't even imagine how little they might have paid in the 1960s and 70s for a mobile home there, but we sure hope that they will be rebuilding as we're going to make our way west now over towards the remarkable Getty Villa. And I know there was a big scare about the Getty Villa. Mike.
Yeah,
what was that like covering in real time?
Yeah, so, Desmond, the night after that, so many of our reporters were going up and down PCH because it got to the point where everything was so dangerous to get any further into the hills other than PCH was really the only safe way to make sure our crews could escape. And as you know, you can see a portion of the villa from PCH, and there was a fence that was burning just underneath of the villa. And in the thick of the smoke and in the thick of the fire, and you can see all the devastation, everything that was burning on the hillsides, there was a very large concern that the Getty Villa had caught fire. And I remember we spent a good amount of time, you see some of the video there on your right-hand side of your screen, we spent a good amount of time trying to figure out whether or not that the villa was burning. We had people there, we were trying to make phone calls. The villa was assuring us that it was not on fire. You see it there in Desmond's shot. And it was a very kind of real scare. And we learned from the Getty Villa, Des, that they actually have very reinforced walls. Even if it were to fire to come right up to the building, the way that the walls are designed, the way that the building was built is to resist fire and smoke and things like that from getting in and ruining the things that are inside of the villa that are obviously so very important to our history and to everything that's in there. So we were happy to learn finally that the villa had not burned, and very, 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 very close to it. And I think as we kind of look at your shot there, you can kind of see some of the damage that came right up against it. But I can tell you, Des, our Tom Waite was down there, and there was some big concern for a time that the villa was burning.
Yeah, and I actually didn't know that it was fireproof until after I was doing some research, or certainly very fire resistant until I was doing a little bit of research for this, but kind of similar to Pepperdine, and it was very prescient of them to build it in that fashion. I mean, J. Paul Getty, obviously a very, very smart man, at one point was believed to be the richest man in America. This was his original home right here, and he was such a voracious collector of art that he didn't have anywhere to store it all, and so that's when they decided to build the villa, which would become the museum. And this is just one of the greatest treasures in all of Southern California, if not the world. It is a really, really amazing place. I remember being closed in the 90s for like 15 years for a huge renovation. There was so much fanfare when it reopened, so just very relieved that this all survived. Now, again, it is still temporarily closed, and we're going to fly by the Getty Center later as well on our way to the Eaton Fire, which is also built to very, very high fire standards. The wealthiest art institution in the world there, the Getty Center. And sadly, here's another little fact that I actually didn't realize either, that Getty himself never got to see this in person. Even though it was completed 2 years before his death, he spent the remainder of his life at an estate in the English countryside and died in his sleep at the age of 83 and left like $600 million to the Getty Trust, making it the world's wealthiest art endowment, as will kind of reset here. Dylan can just kind of go north and over here to the west, and we'll show you the area here just to the west, which was not nearly as fortunate. This is the coastline neighborhood. Some of the very best views anywhere of the Pacific Ocean. So this is the western edge of the Palisades, right by Topanga Canyon, which, by the way, is also closed right here indefinitely. As I zoom in, huge mudslides. No indication of when Topanga Canyon will be reopening. It could be a very long time. Mike, you remember that slide that we had? I think it was just last year. It was one slide, and wasn't the roadway closed for like 3 or 4 months or something just for that one event? It
took them a really long time to get that back open, and because they weren't sure what kind of slide it was on the hill. And this time, though, Des, as we've pointed out, it's worse because we believe portions of the roadway actually washed out during these slides. So I'm sure that's going to take much longer.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure Caltrans resources are spread rather thin with all of these, all of the construction and manning the closures here along PCH, in addition to all of the other things that they do. So let us turn more to the west, and we're going to go all the way to the edge, the western edge of the Palisades fire. Although we will kind of have the sun may be a bit of an issue. We'll see if we can mitigate that. But we're going to see some of the most shocking scenes, because here we can see it where we have these homes right along Pacific Coast Highway, and Dylan, we may need to keep a little altitude here if we're able to. Look at just where the fire just jumped from one home to the next, and it was almost just like a giant hand of fire, just like a line of dominoes, smashed all of these beachside homes. Some of these homes were not very big, but they're right on the water, so you had like $5 million tear down homes right here. These were the just world famous homes here between Topanga Canyon and Las Flores, and nearly all of them were destroyed.
And
yeah,
Des,
Dylan,
really quick, what was so
Yeah,
interesting about
perfect.
when that happened, when those fires happened, there was no fire around them, right? The hillside on the other side was not on fire. There was one house that caught fire,
Okay,
and in the wind, it just bounced from house to house to house to house to house. Anybody who remembers those houses before the fire knows that they were basically all touching each other. And that's really what caused them to spread the way it did. Our Tom Wade, again, was in that neighborhood, and it was really remarkable to see that there was no fire on the hillside. There was no other flames except for one house catching another house, catching another house, catching another house, which, you know, all obviously begs the question, if they're going to be rebuilt, are they going to be rebuilt the same way? Are there going to be more space between things now to help prevent this row of destruction like we're seeing right now?
Yeah, a very good question. And, you know, these homes were not only under threat from fire, but, you know, mudslides have historically been a problem as well. I remember being a kid and watching, there was in an El Nino year one year after some fires when a lot of homes got taken out from mudslides. So I can't even imagine what the insurance premiums are going to look like. This is a Pena Road just to the west here of Topanga Canyon. Just a lot more destruction. But we're going to take another quick break, and next we're going to do a flyby of Big Rock, Moon Shadows, and the western edge of the Palisades fire before we continue to the Eaton fire. We'll be right back. All right, well, we are back, and we're actually going to switch the order up a little bit just because the glare is so annoying as we're headed due west on PCH. So we're still going to go look at Moon Shadows and the Big Rock community, but we'll catch them on the way back. I wanted to go over towards downtown Malibu, Las Virgenes, and the western edge of the Palisades fire. And a big part of the reason why the fire ended here is because of the Franklin fire. This is something that we haven't really talked much about, but has really been on my mind, as we can see Pepperdine over here, which wasn't threatened so much by the Palisades fire as it was by the Franklin fire. But like Mike was saying earlier, just how important being up to snuff as far as, you know, durability against fires. Pepperdine is renowned for that, as we learned during the Franklin fire, that they actually tell people to shelter in place because their campus is so fortified against fire. And it was also a relief that HRL Laboratories, some of the most important scientific research facilities in the world right here, where the laser was developed, this was also under threat. But the reason I want to mention the Franklin fire, which now you can not even really see the burn scar of that fire, but maybe I can just kind of draw it up on the screen. It was all kind of up in this area. And if you remember, that it broke out about a month before, sometime in December. And you know, 4 homes burned down in that, I recall, and that, you know, obviously really awful for those people. But because the Palisades fire hit the Franklin fire scar, it kind of prevented it from continuing any farther west. I mean, who knows how much farther that fire could have gone. And so it's really kind of almost, I don't want to say serendipitous, because we do know that some people lost homes in the Franklin fire. But here as we zoom in on the Sarah retreat, this was threatened by the Franklin fire. It survived that, and because it survived that, I think it probably survived the Palisades fire as well. It could have ended up being just completely overrun by flames. So yeah, I mean, we were pretty busy with fires, Mike, even before we were covering the Palisades and the Eaton fire.
Yeah, I remember the Franklin fire broke out, you know, it was in the 11 o'clock hour, Des. You were coming up from Orange County. I think we were going over a chase or something like that. And we saw it on the end of the lens, and it was one of those fires we stayed on all night for. And it was a sizable fire, one that we hadn't seen in a while. And, you know, little did we know that about a month later, we'd be seeing and covering the biggest fires of our careers and of our times here in Los Angeles and in California. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it burned right up to the Franklin fire. And, you know, Des, the people that were evacuated during the Franklin fire were evacuated again during the Palisades fire just a month later. So you can only imagine kind of the trauma that they had to deal with going through all of that, being evacuated twice. And the Palisades fire, obviously much more destructive and deadly than the Franklin fire was. But I'm sure that is, you know, something that was on their minds when they had to evacuate once again.
Yeah, I really can't even imagine going through that. And now, I mean, it just, how are you going to handle, you know, when the next time when the Santa Ana winds blow up, or, you know, like the way that they did. As we see here near Carbon Beach, I believe, this may be the farthest west home that was destroyed, or certainly one of the very closest ones here, right near the very end of the Palisades fire. And it's just kind of crazy when you look farther west of there, it's almost like you can't even tell that anything ever happened. But we're going to continue east now, and we're going to make our way to the Eaton Fire shortly. But we're going to be coming up on Dukes right here. I believe that is it right down in there at Las Flores. And it survived. That's the good news. But the bad news is they had a lot of issues with the rains that came not long after the fire, right, Mike?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they got some smoke damage during the Palisades fire, and we checked on them a couple of times because, again, there were some pretty close calls with them as well, worried that they were on fire. But no, it was just the mud damage that came after the rainstorms. You know, I just had a chance to speak with kind of the regional manager of Dukes, I think it was last week or the week before, when we were talking about this, because they actually had to file a notice with the state of California saying that they had to lay off all of their employers, or just about all of them, 127 of them, I believe, or at least over 100, because they weren't sure when they were going to be reopened. They haven't reopened since the fires of January 7th. They hope, they tell me, to be reopened by this summer, and they hope that they'll be able to rehire the 100+ staff that they had to lay off as a result of it. But Dukes is such a staple in Malibu, and it's just very unfortunate to know that they survived the fire only to get heavily damaged by all the mud that came through.
Yeah, and it's another one of those kind of quintessential coastal California experiences. There's 3 in California, 3 in Hawaii. I've been to the one in Oahu, a very, very memorable time there. And, you know, I mean, any of these places you can come along PCH. I mean, you know, this is what we live here, right? That's what we always say anyway. We put up with the traffic and the high cost of living to come and get some of these experiences. And so to see this, it's just, yeah, I mean, the building survived, but hopefully they will be able to reopen. But the one that did not survive, and I've got to find the exact structure here, is Moon Shadows, which was a real tragedy and had actually been tragic on several levels even before the fire, because the owner of the restaurant died only a couple of years ago in a crash with his teenage son on Mulholland Drive in a vintage Mustang. It was very, very sad for the community, and now his beloved restaurant has burned down as well. Let's see if it's on my point of interest thing right here. Well, it's right by Big Rock, I know that. And here's Big Rock Drive. It's just to the west, so it's going to be one of these buildings right down in here. But it was another one of those incredible, this might be it right down here, those amazing, it just nothing, absolutely nothing left of this. I mean, it looks like the ocean has probably washed away whatever was left. I mean, it was bunched together with a lot of other homes, but it's just so insane to see that completely vanished from existence. They had a really heartfelt message. Dylan, we can continue to fly east, but I saw on their website.
All right, we'll reestablish with Desmond there just a second. Happens when they make those turns. There we are. We're back, Des.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to, as we make our way east, and we're going to go fly by the Getty Center on our way to the Eaton Fire, this message that I saw on the website from Moon Shadows that says, "Rising from the ashes together, we are heartbroken to share that Moon Shadows Malibu, our beloved oceanfront home for nearly 40 years, was tragically lost in the Palisades fire on January 8th, 2024. While the flames took our walls, they can never take the memories, laughter, and love shared within them. Our incredible employees, our family, now face an uncertain future. They've been the heart and soul of every unforgettable experience at Moon Shadows, and now they need your help." And they do have a GoFundMe, moonshadowsmalibu.com, if you want to visit their website. There will be, you know, a lot of GoFundMes, obviously, but if that is one that you're interested in, if you have some special memories there from Moon Shadows, sadly, I never got to visit it myself. I had just done a look at this segment on it only, I think, a month or so before it was decimated. So, but there you go, moonshadowsmalibu.com for more on that. And as we fly back over the villa, so we saw the western flank of the fire. We're going to also, on the way to the Eaton Fire, go by the eastern flank and Mandeville Canyon. We'll slow down as we pass by that celebrity enclave where there was a lot of threat from the fire. And Mike, I remember at its height, the fire actually began to encroach into the San Fernando Valley. Is that right?
It did, yeah. So north on the north end of the fire, Encino was actually under evacuation for a period of time, actually mandatory evacuations. And Desmond, Mandeville Canyon was something that I was particularly concerned about in the days after the start of the Palisades fire. And, you know, I want to talk about really quick something you mentioned in that moonshadow statement, that the moonshadows burned down January 8th. It is not a very usual event that we have fires that are so destructive day after day after day, right? When we cover fires, it is usually several hours of destruction, a full day of destruction. What was very so sad and, devastating about both the Palisades and the Eaton fires was it was multiple days of devastating destruction that was happening in these fires. And you talk about Mandeville Canyon, Desmond, really concerned because of the way that canyon goes. There is not a lot of space there between where they've got those houses right at the base of the canyon. And that was finally when we were able to get aircraft back in the air. So we were watching very, very closely as those aircraft were doing everything they could to keep that fire from running down the hill and getting into some of those homes. We know a couple of them were damaged in the fire there when it came down. But to your point, Desmond, all the way north into Encino. I remember that night that happened because there's a hospital right on Ventura Boulevard that was preparing to evacuate. And when you think about where it started in the Pacific Palisades area and the run that it made through the Santa Monica mountain range, almost into the San Fernando Valley, to the point where they were getting ready to evacuate a hospital at Encino on Ventura Boulevard. That was really wild.
It's crazy too, because the fire was essentially burning against the wind. The wind was trying to carry it the other direction. And I guess that just speaks to how hot the fire was and how dry all of the fuel was as well. Now, I'm not sure if you remember. I mean, I know Mandeville Canyon definitely got a big scare on this one, but did any homes actually burn in Mandeville Canyon?
I do believe that there was one or two. I think there was a couple that were kind of not right on Mandeville Canyon, but maybe a little, pushed back or tucked away a little bit more, that I believe did burn, because that was that Saturday morning. And we had crews that were up on these, kind of hillsides right here looking down. And there were, I remember there were one or two homes that burned in Mandeville Canyon. Not as bad as I was concerned about, because luckily they had so many aircraft. I mean, you remember, Des, I think you flew over or were close to Camarillo when you got back. The sheer air support that they had operating out of Camarillo Airport, something CAL FIRE told me was the first time that CAL FIRE themselves have ever operated a 24/7 base was during the Eaton and Palisades fires.
Yeah, like a dozen or so helicopters that were there. It was, nice to see all those resources from all over the place, but really insane stuff. As we fly by the Getty Center, which also had kind of a glancing blow, just some of the, a little bit of the landscaping burned, but the structure itself also very fire resistant, and it reopened at the end of January. They hosted a really big fundraiser for LA artists, which is very, very cool. And as we are now going to make our way to the Eaton fire, right before we go to a break, I wanted to mention as well that I'm not sure if you saw, Mike, just a couple of days ago, that the Getty Trust announced that they're taking out $500 million in bonds to shore up their two campuses to make them even more resistant to fires and natural disasters. So a lot of work going to be happening both to the Getty Center and the Getty Villa as we fly by Bel Air on our way to the Eaton fire.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And with that,
go ahead, Des.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. You take it away and you send us to break.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention it's incredible that they're trying to do some of that stuff and how resilient, our community came after that, Des. And yeah, as we get over to the Eaton fire, we will take that quick break. We'll be right back.
We are back with our fire coverage special as we are en route from the Palisades fire to the Eaton fire. And I know that we had some of our viewers who really want me to talk about the Bunny Museum, and rest assured we will be showing the Bunny Museum. That's something that I didn't even know about existed, and it was just so heartbreaking to hear that it was destroyed. They do plan on rebuilding, so we will definitely be looking at the Bunny Museum. I have some of the Eaton fire locations in my map tracker. I'm not as familiar with them off the top of my head as we're flying by not too far away from where the Sunset fire broke out now and really gave Hollywood a big scare. Isn't that right, Mike?
I was actually here covering the Palisades, the Eaton Fire, and then the Sunset Fire broke out. And it was actually Desmond Oliver was in SKYCAL that night filling in for you, and we were transitioning between the two fires. And I look at his shot and I said, Oliver, what is that? And he said, it's a fire that broke out. We found the fire before the LAFD did, before anybody had called it in, and we were getting to the scene just as I was about to phone it in. Our pilot, and I think it was actually Dylan, it was either Dylan or I think Chris, actually got on the radio on the common frequency 02 and alerted, there's Dylan, and alerted the LAFD helicopter that was over at the Palisades fire that a new fire was happening over in the Hollywood Hills area. And that did scare a lot of people because that is so populated, and so many people had already seen what had happened in the Palisades fire and how quickly that fire ran through the town and through the neighborhood there that they were so concerned. I actually had to go, I was just on the border of the evacuation warning area, had to go and just make sure things were okay at home. So many other people, our colleague Chris Holmstrom, he also had to evacuate. He was just right at the base of Runyon Canyon there. So that gave people a scare. Luckily, they were able to get that under control, as you see the Griffith Observatory right there. Des, I wanted to just real quick, if we can, talk about a couple people, one comment in particular on YouTube. Somebody asked, what percentage of the devastated homes have they completed searching for remains? This question is timely right now because just yesterday we learned from the medical examiner that they found another set of human remains in the Eaton fire, which is where you are headed to now, marking the 30th death between the two fires. To answer that question, as far as we're aware, and I do have somebody over at the Sheriff's Department double checking on this for us, but as far as we are aware, those searches were completed. And obviously, it's a lot to try to sift through, so they did their best trying to get through each one of those parcels. What likely happened in this situation, and again, we're working to verify this, is that there was some debris removal going on when sadly, somebody came across the remains, and that's when the Sheriff's Department got called. The medical examiner got called as well. And Des, it's sad to think about because it's been 3 months now, so you always kind of have to wonder, did this person live alone? Did they not have family that was reported them missing to have them go more thoroughly check the piece of property there? So that's all still underway, and unfortunately it still gives you the very real understanding of how devastating these fires were, that even 3 months later, another set of human remains was found.
It's really, really crazy, extremely sad, and just kind of almost, rips the Band-Aid off of that wound as well. Thinking about that, it's just a really stunning thing to think about. That I mean, it makes you wonder if there's, going to be any other victims found. We know that I believe the last count that I had saw, well, it was maybe it's 18 now. I'm not sure.
Yep.
Do you have an updated total on how many people were killed, Mike?
It's 30 total, 18 at the Eaton fire.
Yeah, and 9,000 structures, I believe, at the Eaton fire as well, like 7,000 at the Palisades fire. So the Palisades fire, area-wise, was considerably larger, I think, but the Eaton fire, because it devastated a very kind of packed-in area of Altadena, such a beautiful community. And you know what, actually, Mike, let me just do one technical thing up here because I might need to switch mountaintops here. So as we're on our way, let me just throw it over to you as we get ready for the Eaton fire coverage. Yeah,
no problem. And just a little behind the scenes there. We usually shoot into our Mount Wilson, but Altadena, Pasadena is right up against Mount Wilson. So Desmond's going to switch to a different mountaintop to get a little bit better reception. And as we do that, we can talk about the start of the Eaton fire. We were live here on the air on SKYCAL with the Palisades fire when I at the desk started getting reports of a new fire happening in the Eaton and Altadena areas. I immediately went to one of our new cameras, the Alert Wildfire cameras, and immediately saw that flare up and that flame start to come down off the hillside in Altadena. And I can tell you, as I watched it, these are time-lapse cameras. So as I continued to refresh and continued to update the time-lapse, watching that fire race down the hill, we knew something was up almost immediately. And we had seen a photographer got in the area. Lori Fernandez was one of our first crews in the area, and we could see the devastation. And unfortunately, Des, as soon as that happened, we knew something bad was happening. Excuse me, still working on Desmond's signal there as he's kind of getting tucked into the pocket of the Altadena area. I think we got him back. Oh, excuse me, my cough is kicking me up there. But the Altadena fire came right off the hillside there. Excuse me, right off the hillside and immediately went into that neighborhood right down Lake Avenue, splitting right there between Pasadena and Altadena. The Sheriff's Department working on that. We're going to work on Desmond's signal. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back.
We are back, and hopefully we have our technical difficulties squared away as we zoom in now where we believe the Eaton Fire took off. And Mike, as we get in on these high-tension power lines, it's just been such a frustrating thing. It's what started the Woolsey Fire, the Thomas Fire. So many of the biggest fires in California history started by these power lines, and we know that they had the fire off on the west side of Eaton Canyon, but not on the east side. And you just tell me what you were going through here as we were now being basically flanked by two horrible fires at the same time.
Yeah, Des, we saw that, as I was mentioning before the break. We saw those on the Alert California wildfire cameras. That's where that fire started, and we saw it come down. Now, there's no argument, rather, where the fire started, but it's how the fire started. As we look at these high-tension power lines, what's very interesting is you see the two towers in the front of your shot, and then you see that small tower in the back. The working theory, or the allegations in several lawsuits, and something Southern California Edison is looking into, is that small tower in the back, that hasn't been energized in decades. Since the 1970s is the last time that actually carried power. There is a theory that somewhere down the line, further to the west, that there was a conduction that caused that power line to be energized, which then had signs of arcing. On the right side of your screen, you're looking at video from Ring doorbells and from cell phone videos of that fire starting. You see those high-tension power lines. Southern California Edison says they're looking into it. They're basically, at this point, saying they're only responding to all these lawsuits through the legal process. The County of Los Angeles, the biggest player in this, to sue Southern California Edison over their alleged involvement in the start of the Eaton Fire. Des, we have to point out both Palisades and the Eaton, the ATF, the federal investigators, fire departments have not officially listed the cause or laid responsibility on Southern California Edison, but certainly multiple lawsuits have.
Yeah, we'll just have to see how all of that plays out as we show you the burn scar here that fanned over towards Sierra Madre and definitely did some damage over there and threatened Mount Wilson. Once again, this was under threat during fires in 2020. It was the Bobcat fire, I believe, that nearly threatened Wilson, and things got very, very close there again. Fortunately, everything ended up being okay there, but now as we go over to where really your heart just sinks as we get now down into Altadena, and it's like the Palisades, arguably even worse. More structures were destroyed here, and it's incredibly sad, too, because, Altadena, while certainly more of an upside, look, let's be honest, nothing is cheap in Southern California anymore, but Altadena was much more attainable. It was much more middle class than the Palisades was, in general. And you hear about the stories, the history of Altadena, and how, especially in the 1960s, the black population increased here so much. The people of color had a very strong foothold here because this was one of the few areas where they were allowed to buy property, one of the areas that were not subject to redlining. And then in the 1960s, when the 210 freeway was built, a lot of them moved farther to the east away from kind of the Arroyo Seco over to this area after the freeway was developed, and developed really strong multi-generational bonds. And we'll put up the map tracker here and show you. So, up at the top of Lake Avenue and Marengo. And let me just kind of, we are starting to get a little bit dark here, but just really, you could tell that these were definitely a lot of, working class people. These were really hardworking people with blue collar jobs that had a lot of these homes, and it's just home after home after home, and just showing you, like I say, it doesn't get any easier to see this even 3 months on. Like, a war zone is what you always hear, but I think of Dresden during World War II and the images that we saw in history books. And now I know there's a lot of concern. We were just doing a story last week about some of the pools that are here becoming breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and that could just end up being kind of a whole other thing. And it's like, where do you begin as you look at these neighborhoods completely decimated by the fires? Let's take a look at the Andrew McNally house. I should have it up here in my map system. Go ahead, Mike.
Just as while you're looking at it, one thing that I've noticed, Eaton Fire compared to the Palisades Fire, it looks to me like the debris removal process is moving along a little quicker over here. I feel like I see more lots that are cleared here than I did over at the Palisades Fire. Maybe it's just anecdotally, but it does seem like the clean out process has moved slightly quicker? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, and you know, I'm not sure why exactly that would be, but you are seeing, I mean, a lot of lots completely cleared here.
Yeah.
In you know, less than 3 months' time. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, we still have, you know, I'm from Ventura County. After the Thomas fire, I mean, there were still, you know, lots there with rubble on them for many months after. So they are moving quickly here. And I wanted to mention the Altadena not for sale movement, because this is something that I read about, and I know a lot of the residents here are very determined. Kind of reminds me of what's happening in Lahaina, just, you know, that really strong sense of community that they really want to keep intact. They want to try to fend off real estate developers and speculators as much as possible, trying to convince their neighbors, their community members not to sell. Let's rebuild. Let's, you know, continue the spirit that has been here in Altadena for, you know, coming up on 100 years. So you may see when you're driving in this area, I know that there's bumper stickers going around of the Altadena not for sale. So, you know, if you see them, you know that, you know, those are the real deal residents there. As we now zoom in here, I'm very sad that I never got to do a look at this segment on the Andrew McNally house. So it is McNally, if you've heard of Rand McNally, the map company, it was the co-founder of that company, and he built the home here in 1887. It was one of the most amazing homes that was here, and this guy was so wealthy that at one point, before this was all subdivided into, it was much larger back then, much larger spread. He had his own private railroad spur from the main line in Altadena so that he could store his own private rail car, which is like, how baller is that? I just feel like that is really an amazing thing. And he had an aviary and all kinds of stuff, and it was privately owned. It was sold for $3 million back in 2021. It was a popular filming a destination as well. The HBO series Hacks was the very last thing that was filmed here, but it was also very popular during the silent film era. And so this is a major loss, a home from 1887 that burned down. Very sad that I never got to see it fully intact, but you can find some really amazing pictures online. So now, though, I want to get to the Bunny Museum. I believe I have it up here. Just give me a second to find it. It's on Lake Avenue, 2605 Lake.
Des, while you're looking for it, I got to say the Bunny Museum is not something that I knew about prior to the fires. And you talk about community. That is one of the things that we had so many people writing in about during the fire and immediately following it. What happened to the Bunny Museum? Is the Bunny Museum okay? And, you know, one of our executive producers kind of lives in this area and knows the Bunny Museum. And I was like, what is the Bunny Museum?
Yeah, I know. I never knew about it either. And, gosh, I really hope that they're able to rebuild. So apparently they called it the hoppiest place on earth. I mean, how cute is that? It was founded in 1999 by husband and wife Candace Frazee and Steve Lubansky. And it wasn't originally here, but they moved it to this building in 2017. And the LA Times says that the museum held more than 40,000 rabbit-related items across 16 galleries and 7,000 square feet of space. And it actually had the Guinness World Record of the largest collection of rabbit-related items. So, I mean, we have so many quirky museums in the greater LA area, but this just might have been the quirkiest. They do say that they're going to rebuild, and they do have a GoFundMe account on there. So if that really pulls at your heartstrings, definitely search out the Bunny Museum Altadena and find that and contribute to that. Fortunately, I do know I had read that the live rabbits, bunnies that they had here were safely evacuated. So I was, you know, kind of similar to the Will Rogers. I'm a big animal person, and so I was, you know, at least breathed a sigh of relief to hear that. I mean, a small silver lining anyway, but you know, hopefully maybe some of those rabbits will get to return to a brand new home someday. But the remnants of the Bunny Museum, one of so many places lost here in Altadena. Next, if you want to chime in here, Mike, take it away. I'm going to locate the Zane Gray Estate, 396 Mariposa Avenue.
Yeah, Des, you know, looking at your video here from SKYCAL, it's really remarkable. Life goes on, right? It's a different life, but you know, you're looking at the Bunny Museum, you see cars parked in the parking lot, and people still have to move forward after this, no matter how tough it is. Des, they asked if we're going to go to break one more time, and we'll be right back after this in Altadena. 3 months later, the LA fires from above. We'll be right back.
As we are back on our special fire streaming live on SKYCAL News and YouTube, as we are over the Eaton Fire, and another really devastating loss for the community here was the Zane Grey estate. This is another one that I never had the privilege of covering. The very, very beautiful home, this Mediterranean-style home that was built in 1907. It was built by a couple of the most legendary architects in Southern California, Myron Hunt and Elmer Gray, who have a very long and storied legacy, especially in the Pasadena and the Altadena area. And they were also responsible for the Huntington Hotel, the Wilson Observatory, a lot of the buildings at Occidental College, and this one, which was bought by author Zane Grey in 1920. That's where it got its name from. And what's especially sad about this is that the home was actually built to the strongest fireproof standards that they had at that time. And you can see, I mean, the building is intact. I mean, maybe this is salvageable. The walls are still here. It's certainly not, as decimated as the Rand McNally or the Andrew McNally property, or so many of the other losses that we've seen, but still a really devastating loss here. This Mediterranean revival home, one of my very favorite architectural styles, and is just so indicative of Southern California. So, so much history lost here in Altadena as well. And we're going to move over to another thing that I was unaware of and would have made a great segment, as I'm going to try to guide Dylan over to the top of Fair Oaks, is the Zorthian Ranch. So it's going to be a little bit to the west. There's Lake Avenue, as we'll come over here, and you can see the burn scar here, how it just raced along these foothills. And we saw that social media video of the couple that had stepped out with the 80-mile-an-hour winds, and they knew what they were in for when they saw the fire up on this hillside when it was about to sweep through Altadena. Let's find our way over to the top of Lincoln. That's too far. I think Fair Oaks is going to be right down in here. So, yep, there we go. So right up at the very top, and hopefully we'll be able to see this. So the Zorthian Ranch, something I just learned about recently. It was actually, here's the property down in here. So the origins, and again, unfortunately, a huge loss. Apparently a couple of the original homes are still standing, but the community center and their historical archives were destroyed. It was built by the Zorthian family, who made it to the U.S. after escaping the Armenian genocide. And they came here after World War II. I'm not going to pronounce his first name because I don't want to butcher it, but his first initial Jay Zorthian, and his wife Betty Williams came here. And Jay Zorthian studied fine art at Yale and also art and architecture at schools throughout Europe. And he came and he wanted to make a self-sustainable community and make structures out of anything he could find. Kind of similar to the Watts Towers and the Rubel Castle in Glendora. Yeah. Just kind of repurposing anything that they could find. He would use discarded construction materials, but also things like lawn furniture, telephone poles, railroad ties, cars and trucks were all incorporated. And it sounds like from my research that this became a very popular kind of artist colony up here, and they are very determined to rebuild as well. I know that they also have a GoFundMe that you can investigate. The Zorthian Ranch here at the top of Fair Oaks, one of so many losses. Unfortunately, we're kind of starting to lose daylight here, but we'll see. We'll stick around as long as we can here. But I also read, though, that fortunately, everyone was able to get out of here very safely, and they are determined to come back better than ever. And that's really the sentiment that I've seen, certainly across both fires, but I just really kind of feel the spirit so strongly across Altadena, the real sense of pride and community. I know we had heard that, in the Palisades, within like a couple of weeks, there was a lot or two that was like already listed for sale.
Yeah.
Didn't it sell for like $1 million or something, Mike? I don't know if you've heard about any of that going on here.
Not necessarily in Altadena, though I believe it has happened, but in Palisades, I did speak with the realtor who said, look, and you can't blame the people either. This woman, she was an older woman. She just didn't want to go through the years of struggle and heartache of rebuilding, and she pretty quickly decided that she just kind of wanted to sell the house. And, Des, you talk about the community spirit and character in Altadena, and it's very true and it's very strong, but I would ask you if you agree. I think across the region, there was such a shift after the fires. It just generally kind of seems like people are a bit nicer to each other these days. There was something about that this tragedy that kind of pulled people together a little bit more, or at least that's something that I have felt in the community a little bit. I know it's true in the Altadena and Palisades area in particular, but it just seems like after that, the whole city just really kind of came together for each other for a little while.
Yeah, the whole city and the whole region. I mean, the images that we saw over at the Santa Anita racetrack with the clothing drives and the food drives, the canned food drives, really, really amazing stuff. And, the most populous county in the country, we can definitely be there for each other in times of need. There are a lot of people with a lot of resources here, and there have been a ton of fundraisers that I've really enjoyed seeing and contributing to, if it's for animals or for people. And we donated some clothes ourselves, gladly to help people out. We're going to be ending fairly soon, but one of the last things, and unfortunately, I know there was Fox's restaurant, a nearly 80-year-old restaurant that was lost. There was also the Altadena Community Church, which was a really, really devastating loss. But I did want to end on kind of a higher note, and that is Christmas Tree Lane, because it survived, and I was very, very relieved to learn that. Fortunately, it is getting pretty dark here, and I know that a few of the homes did burn, but you can see the gorgeous deodar trees, the oldest outdoor community display in the world, it's believed. That's what the association says. And it's believed that because these trees are so well taken care of by the association, that they survived. All of the trees, they definitely lost some limbs, but they were able to survive those hurricane-force winds. And they definitely want to get the lights back on. They really want to continue the tradition. There's only been a couple of years where the lights have been off, and that was during World War II and during COVID. And so I really, really hope it would be such an amazing thing for Altadena, just such a great moral victory if they were able to turn the lights back on here, a Christmas Tree Lane this coming year. Definitely my hope. One of my very favorite traditions every year, come down here on Santa Rosa Avenue, and there's so many. Unfortunately, now you can see the lane survived. Not all the homes did. There were definitely some losses here, some heavy property losses, and as we can see, the patrols that continue from LA County Sheriff's deputies as well, making sure that there's no looting or anything nefarious going on in these neighborhoods. But one thing, despite all the loss that we've seen, like I said, I was just so relieved, at least Christmas Tree Lane and these gorgeous trees, and I really hope that that will continue. So as we're going to start to head back to base now, Mike, just any kind of closing thoughts, I mean, for you as you were covering these fires. It was just incredible watching you on the cruise ship on CBSN.
Yeah, no, thanks, Des. I mean, look, this was a very trying time for our community. It was hard as a journalist to cover it. It was hard to be here for those, umpteen hours every day. We were here on the air, 62 and a half hours straight. We were on the air trying to provide that information. And as challenging as that was for us here in the station, for our reporters in the field, it pales in comparison to what the people who have lost everything dealt with January 7th, 8th, 9th, and what they'll continue to deal with, and what their new reality is. And I just want to take this opportunity to tell the people that dealt with that we'll be here for you. We'll be here with you as we rebuild Southern California, and we're dedicated to being here with you through that process. That's why we do things like this. That's why we have our 4:30 half-hour special on Friday nights. And I want to take this opportunity, if there's anything related to the fires that you need help getting an answer to, you need help getting through a particularly difficult red tape, something that doesn't seem fair to you, something that seems off, like we talked about with the fake boutiques, kcalnews.com/tips. That comes right to my computer here, and we'll look into those things for you, and we'll do our best to try to get answers for you or to hold people accountable if things aren't going right. This is not something that's a one and done for us. We will be here for years as it takes our community to rebuild. Desmond, I know you'll be here, and we want to continue to do things like this because we're all in this community together, and we want to make sure that we use the power that we have as journalists to help everyone get through this.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Very well said. And I just kind of wanted to say, you know, when this was all breaking out, I was shoving offshore I usually take the first week of the year off, and I couldn't believe the forecast when we were leaving port when on the weather app it was saying 100-mile-an-hour winds. I just couldn't believe it. There was one person on social media that was forecasting it the week before, and I thought, there's no way we're going to have winds that strong. And my jaw dropped when we were leaving the port of Long Beach and heard that was going to happen the next day. And I just wondered, is LA going to be able to get through this? And it was just a surreal thing being on a cruise ship, and honestly, a very bittersweet vacation. Just honestly felt kind of guilty not being there for LA at that time. I just can't believe that the timing of that. But and then when I came back the first day that there was no smoke. It was I was expecting to come back, and it was almost like it wasn't real, like it didn't happen. And so as I'm driving up the 405 and expecting to see this big plume of smoke, and the skies were completely clear, the wind had blown all the smoke out, and then I came back that day that we debarked the ship, and I came back and flew that night and got my first look at it. And yeah, the worst tragedy that I've certainly covered of my career, and you know, I just hope that these new 100-mile-an-hour winds are not going to be the new normal in this era of climate change. We had said that the Woolsey fire and the Thomas fire were the worst of our careers, and sadly we have a new worst ever with the Eaton fire and the Palisades fire. But as Mike said, we will be there every step of the way. You'll want to follow our SoCal Rebuilds series. It's going to take a very long time, but SoCal will be united, and we will pull through. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us on this fire streaming special, 3 months on the Palisades and Eaton fire. Appreciate everyone tuning in, and we will talk to you on SKYCAL News at 8. Thanks for watching.